I love the whole thing. All right, so let's have some fun today, gentlemen. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the HR Revolution or Evolution. No matter what way you look at it, we're under new times in this world of work. So we talk about the revolution of HR for the evolution of business today. And we do that through conversations with experts and industry professionals like today, Dr. Nick, who we could not be more excited to have on the show today because Nick focuses on performance. So we love to have conversations. We love to pull out that intellectual and social capital from our guests so our listeners can learn and start applying this to their day jobs and make them better leaders or make them that fractionally better within their day is really why we do this and why this is a passion project for my friend Chris and I, as well as Bobby and Jonna. So Chris is with me today as the co-host.
Thank you, Kevin. And it's great to be back for another episode. Really excited, as Kevin said, our mission here is to make sure that we providing, information, data, details that are going to help all of us perform better in our roles. And can't be more excited for our guest, Dr. Nick Molinaro, today with us. Dr. Nick is the CEO and founder of Performance in Mind. He is a licensed psychologist with specialties in counseling and performance and sports psychology. In the corporate world, Dr. Nick helps organizations with assessments, coaching, succession planning, and talent acquisition. His vast array of clients, again, this is not all the entire list, but some of them include BlackRock, BMS, Comfort Systems USA, and many others. You may have heard him on the airways as well if you listen to PGA Tour Radio, NBA Radio, CBS Sports Talk Radio, and ESPN Radio. On behalf of Kevin and myself, we want to thank you, Dr. Nick, for joining us today and welcome you to the show.
Well, it's my pleasure to be here, gentlemen. I appreciate this very much and looking forward to our conversation and having some fun with you boys.
That's what it's all about. Well, the weather's starting to change, so I know you probably have already been on the course a couple of times, Nick. Yes. I got to ask, what drive are you hitting these days?
TaylorMade.
TaylorMade?
Yep.
Is it what year? This year? Is it the latest? Is this model even
No,
hit the shelves yet?
No, I'm working on my swing. So before I invest in, getting refitted, that now I'm a little bit up in age. So I'm waiting till I get my swing better before I get some new equipment.
Hey, that's all right. It sounds like the TaylorMade's probably still straight, right down the gut of
right down the middle.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's awesome. That's great. What's your handicap these days, Dr. Nick?
It's an 18. Years ago when I was playing a lot of golf, I was at an 11. I've been as low as 14. This year, I made a concerted effort. I'll be back by a 14 in the next 2 months. There's no doubt.
That's awesome.
How about that performance? Those small things, right? We talk about breaking these big goals down. 4 strokes doesn't sound like much, but it is a lot, right? How do we boil these big goals down to little goals is kind of what Chris and I are really trying to help businesses and organizations and leaders try to understand that goal setting is no longer really enough. And I know you on being on the performance side, Nick, you've seen a lot of that, and you've probably seen how leadership has changed, and nothing better to compare a professional athlete with a CEO. What are some of the things that you're starting to see today from your research and the work that you're doing? And is leadership starting to change? Is performance in leadership starting to change? From your estimation, what is happening in leadership today?
I think there's a resurgence, particularly I find this with the top performers, large organizations with leadership that's committed to the way they're living their life. So, we can go in and just like you can fix anybody's swing with golf, but you better fix their mindset too, in order to be able to perform at the highest level. So I've been blessed with the opportunities to work with some very high-performing corporations and leaders, and it's exciting to see that they're doing this within their entire life. Now, I'm not suggesting that it's not happening in other areas, but I would say that that's probably going to be the wave of the future, is where people are recognizing that this is not just about work. This is about living your life. Yeah. This is, stuff you've read about, growth mindset, Carolyn Dweck stuff and grit, So we can look over a lot of that kind of research, but what I'm finding in amazing proportions that the highest performers are looking at how to enrich themselves in their lives, not just their leadership at work.
Yeah. I think that you bring up a great point. What I'd love to know, Dr. Nick, is, you know, working in two different areas of focus, the sports world, sports psychology, and the corporate world. What do you see as the biggest similarities between those two, and maybe what are the biggest differences between, you know, those two distinct areas of focus?
Great question, Chris. Thanks. You know, most of the time when I'm brought in to consult and they're looking over someone who's going to be in a position of leadership, and they want to know about my sports background and why is it used, you know, in the work that I'm doing. And what I always go back to is executive functioning. It's sort of like, I'm an executive, we measure my functioning. I said, well, we're looking at your cognitive function. We're looking at your cognitive executive functioning. So kind of a long story, but I think you'll see the benefit of listening to this. So when I wrote my book on youth sports, what I was really interested in was never winning. It was about how youth can learn how to make more effective decisions in the moment, and then being able to train them as they're growing, how to do that in business settings, as an example, or in any aspect of their life. So the biggest thing that I find in high performers, you know, either performers in business that have athletic backgrounds, and they're asking me, well, is it all about teamwork? And I said, well, you know, maybe, you know, is it all about the competition? No. Is it all about winning? And when I bring this up, I'm saying, how do you make decisions? And once I ask that question, they're saying, well, you know, I'm not really sure. You can't think of every word you're going to say before you say it, right? And that's because your subconscious mind is doing this. So in leadership, those who are performing at their highest level, they're using a global process of their being that kind of person. So we're not just saying, well, how do you become a CEO or a CFO and C-suite? We're looking at the way in which they're looking at themselves and the world. So that's what the correlation is. When you see the highest performers that I work with, that's what they're doing. Mm-hmm. Now, how are they different? Well, certainly I would never say every athlete would make a great CEO, just like every military individual would not make a leader. So people think that this is all because of there's competition and teamwork. This really goes to this whole process of decision making. That's not even being analyzed. You know how you make your decisions. So that's what I would see as the major difference. I spend time on metacognition, teaching people how to think about their thinking. And, you know, it's highly interactive kind of work that we do. Hopefully that answers your question, Chris.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you.
Love that. And I think it is about decision making and kind of, Dr. Nick, we're living in this world that's just changing so fast, right? And something that we thought was truth 2 weeks ago is now not, right? And something entirely different. And what I'm starting to see is that more leaders, right? Change before was slow, right? Maybe you would only have a couple changes within the year. It wasn't that disruptive and you could get through it. Now we're seeing constant disruption. From a performance and decision-making standpoint, when we're under constant states of stress, what do you do and how do you help leaders kind of quiet the noise, let's say, so they can make the right decision and maybe a more informed decision rather than a gut knee-jerk instinct decision?
Yeah, great question, Kevin. You know, the whole thing around this stress is cumulative and progressive. So 1 and 1 doesn't equal 2. And so when you look at, that's part of what happens with stress. You know, the definition of stress is kind of anything that moves you away from equilibrium. So even on vacation, you have to try to have fun. You have to try to get there. I mean, with all of what's been going on with COVID. And so it's stressful. So people look at stress in a pejorative way, in a negative way, but things that you enjoy doing can be stressful for some of those reasons. So the first thing that we're doing in our fireside chats is to make sure that we identify what stress is. And then we're trying to take, you know, kind of a survey on what the stressors are, external, internal. And then I always ask the questions in these 3 areas: relief, relaxation, and pleasure. How do you get relief? How do you relax deeper? And how do you actually have enjoyment and pleasure? And interesting, when I get to the last one, people say, yeah, I'm not even sure I know what it is.
Yeah.
And then when they figure it out, they said, when's the last time you did that? And it's sort of like, I have to go back into the archives to try to figure it out. To this stress management piece is that we want to move the individual away from the impact of this so we get relief. You bang your head against the wall for 10 hours, stop banging, it feels good, not pleasurable. And it only feels good because there's an absence of pain.
Yeah.
Each relaxation, we use mindfulness, and I actually do a fair degree of hypnosis with all leaders and business and athletes as well. And then getting the quality of what produces pleasure. The last piece I'll say about this for now is that almost every one of the high performers I'm working with are doing some form of art. Even know how creative they are. And I can help them understand there's more creativity, and you're not even using part of your brain you probably can use.
You're right.
Wow. Wow. And that kind of goes back to the metacognition and more awareness as to how you're making decisions. I think, like you said, is like just even walking through it's almost like those baby steps that now it happens so quickly that we don't even realize how we're making decisions until we say, wait a second, let's pause. Let me have kind of this great reflection, right? This time out, if you will, to really determine how my brain is making those decisions. And something that you told me a long time ago is that your intention drives your attention. And I want to get into that. But one of the things I wanted before I go there, I wanted to ask you a question on the stress, because yes, you deal with executives and you deal with the professional athletes, but let's talk about from top to bottom within these organizations, how much stress all of their employees are handling. If employers were smart or wanted to maximize the performance of their overall workforce, would I be wrong in saying that they should try to limit the amount of stressors that their employees are focusing or harnessing every day?
Well, there's no doubt. First of all, you have to really have an affinity for picking that up, right? So that's when we look at empathy, and I spend much more time on cognitive empathy than the emotional empathy part. And then when we look at, being able to get you some relief, but then kind of encouraging their experiences with pleasure, instead of saying, we can't have an extra day off this week, because of, and obviously you have to do this, in a prudent fashion, but there's no question that they need to look that over. Do the leaders understand what is stressful? Are there stress questionnaires? So when we go into a corp and we're getting norms for that corp, so we'll, as you know, Kevin, we develop our own 360 questions because we're looking for something specific, which that stuff doesn't come off the shelf stuff. And we need to know exactly what's going on within that corp and within that team. So
I love that.
That's interesting. And I think that we're seeing a lot of organizations, Dr. Nick, try to switch into that area of we need to listen more to our people. There's a lot of surveying going on, a lot of listening sessions going on, more what I'll call engagement activities going on, just to kind of understand and empathize really where each of the employees are in their kind of levels of stress that they're taking on, which is interesting.
Right. Well, this becomes a philosophy, right?
Yeah.
So, certainly we hear wellness all the time, and I don't like mental wellness because when you think in opposites like I do, that something else comes up when you hear that term mental. So, our programs are more focused on well-being, and, it's kind of global, but it's really around the philosophy of who you are and who you can become. And, we do some mindfulness stuff, but, because of some of the crazy training that I took in existential psychology and phenomenology, it's to help people understand that their experience of the world is different than others. That's a simple thing to say, but do you really even know what that means, what it is for anybody else? When we get to this whole stress thing, Chris, that's a really critical factor. When you think of 9/11, 9/11, same numbers produce different pictures in your mind. Are leaders aware that the way in which they're communicating or what their goals are might be triggering some other stress responses? We can't get all of that, but it's an appreciation of understanding all communications, and we can jump into the intense stuff, Kevin, when you want to. all communications have a purpose. Otherwise, why would you do it?
Correct. And then maybe right there is a perfect segue, because I lead with this. This was one of the decision-making tools that I got from you is that simplicity. And I love what you said, that everybody's experience is different, right? And I think that is kind of tapping into some of the things that people ask me, like now, is like, why do you share that stuff on LinkedIn, or why do you share your views? And I tell them the same thing, is I never thought people wanted to hear it, right? I never thought that people enjoyed reading it. And then when people start asking you, it's like, oh, okay. And so that really hit home for me. But that going to the intention drives attention is really, what are we behind everything, how we start our day, how we go into a meeting, how can you talk about the power of that and what that just connection of the dot really does, I think, for myself and probably for a lot of your other people that you work with.
Sure. So in the model I've been working on, intention drives attention, as Kevin was explaining. Intention drives attention. Attention drives decision-making. Decision-making drives behavior. Behavior drives performance. So just from that basic framework, the average human has 80,000 thoughts a day. That's a lot of thinking going on. What are you thinking about? And by the end of the day, you don't remember hardly any of those, but 80,000 thoughts a day. And we make 35,000 decisions a day. And we're not even aware, because some of those are subconscious. And so then we look at what's called subconscious intention. I won't go too far down the field there. But so everything you do has a purpose. And we think we understand what the purpose is, and sometimes we don't. You can't think of every word you're going to say before you say it. Subconscious mind is doing that. So your decisions are around that. So I've given the example with you, Kevin, that I'm sure you've read a paragraph, and after you've read it, you don't remember a bloody thing. It's a new paragraph, Kevin, new paragraph. I want you to find the two most important points in this paragraph. Would you read it differently? And the answer is you would. Just because you shifted your intention. So in my optimal functioning model, I take into consideration factors that influence intention, which are values and personality. And they kind of converge into what drives your intention. And now your attention is affected. So, you know, for those of you who are viewing this, we'll do a very quick exercise. So just kind of stare at the screen. And without moving your eyes, I want you to become aware of something to the right of the screen. And don't move your eyes, and just identify what that is. Now, without moving your eyes, shift your attention to the left of the screen. And so you're laughing, Chris, you picked something up there, huh? And something to the left of the screen. And now it's actually possible to be paying attention to both of those things while your focus is on the screen, right?
Yeah.
All you did was shift your attention. So think of the power of your mind of making sure that your attention is where it needs to be. And in performance, you know, outside of the decision-making cognitive processes, it's always external. So if you're interacting with someone else, your attention should be on, you know, picking up the cues, listening to the content. You know, the whole thing about, you know, cognitive empathy is, you know, I said, you know what that person's thinking about? I said, I don't know how they arrived at that decision. That's why I can't understand it. I said, if you tried to understand how they're thinking, I could have had a V8, you know, so they ask themselves the question, what were you thinking? But not in a pejorative way, like, what were you thinking? So you ask them what questions and how questions is a really great strategy. Never ask why. Why assesses motivation. And most times people don't know why. And if you answer why, you're going to ask the question, well, why that? Why that?
Yeah.
How and what ask process questions. So the point I'm making here is that managing stress, using your intentions, generally speaking, if that was what your intention was on a daily basis as a leader, I'm intending on being aware of what stress is being produced in my staff, my team. What can I do today to help them? That'd be a really great way to start the day out.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah,
I love
what you said too about the values and the personality coming together. That was,
Yeah.
I think that says a lot. The cognitive empathy versus emotional empathy, and asking the questions to understand we
Right.
talk a lot about, facts and feelings going on in the individual. Are you asking the right questions? Understand,
That's
the
right.
facts driving, the feelings that they're demonstrating right there. So that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit more about performance, and I want to bubble it up to a process level. So you kind of mentioned on the individual level, how do we, really work towards enhancing our own performance? How do you look at it when it comes to teams and even organizations? I know I'm going to bring up the old performance management process, goal setting, checking in, year-end reviews. What's your stance on all of that? And what have you seen in your work, Dr. Nick, with organizations that are trying to, find the right process that works for that organization?
The key here is, it's going to sound relatively simple, is to work on understanding. Now,
Okay.
that sounds very simple. How do you know someone actually understands you? So,
Yeah.
and I can tell you how you can do that, because I'll certainly give you the answers today. But, a lot of times understanding is, oh, I understand, but you don't really know that a person understands because that's the case.
Mhm.
Now, the reason why this is critical, and if we see it from the top down and it's integrated in what then will become a valuing system, and we'll talk about valuing versus evaluation. When it's part of your valuing system, you can see it start to permeate through the team. So we work with a very high level, finance corp, and we were working with, managing directors, and it was amazing to see, after the analysis of each of them, that there were so many different styles of leading, and who was risk oriented and who wasn't risk oriented, and who used kind of heuristic process, looks like a duck, walks like a duck, that kind of thing, versus someone who was very analytic. But what was characteristic of that entire team was that there was a valuing that was there for the team and for each other. Now, I observed them over 2 days at a retreat and saw that this was the truth. I saw where there were disagreements, but the valuation versus evaluation makes a huge difference. There's nothing wrong with evaluating. However, valuing is going to be part of the culture. So the example is, I'm sure you guys have seen sunsets. There's probably some sunsets up there in New York, right? Maybe to the west there, and look over the mountains. And if you saw a sunset, you wouldn't say, yeah, not so hot. Last night's was much better. I would like that sunset if it was a little bit more like this or that. You just value what that is.
Mhm.
Now imagine if that's the way you treated other people. Imagine if that was from the top down, that the valuation process. Now, of course, there's to be evaluations. We don't want to get ourselves into trouble, but we have to separate those things out. So what I'm saying, to kind of wrap together some of the things we've talked about, is what I'm seeing, that organizations that are really focused on valuation and doing appropriately the evaluation in a constructive way, servant leadership, whatever the model is, that's what I see makes the biggest difference. And so my dissertation was based on understanding.
The evaluation, how that's the most challenging part, I think, though, is
Yeah.
for businesses, right? Is that internal look that
Right.
it can't possibly be them, right? Or it can't possibly be the culture that they've created around themselves or who they've decided. How do you get them comfortable to take that hard internal look instead of always our natural tendency, which I think is to point the finger?
Well, I mean, if the corporation is asking for input, if they're looking for highest level functioning, the thrust of our work would be understanding, first of all. Humans don't do well if they're not in groups, right?
Interesting.
We don't do well. Understanding is the only way to bond relationships between individuals and between a group and a corporation. So understanding, the interesting thing about understanding is requires no proof. What? So my dissertation had no hypothesis, and I got through because I used a very specific process. But the point I'm making is, how do you know someone understands you? And I can go through it, take a little time, maybe not this time, but so I would say that's a key factor in getting the team to work in a unified fashion. If you don't have a sense of belonging, it won't work.
Yeah. I think that's become even more challenging, Dr. Nick, in this hybrid world, this remote world, where you had typically leaders traditionally I hate to say command and control because I can see you and you're in front of me, but now we're all, we're all disparate, we're all separated. And it's hard to maintain that group or that sense of belonging when everybody's working out of their, home offices in front of their computers. So what can leaders do? What can organizations do to help their managers and leaders kind of keep that sense of belonging, that sense of understanding intact?
I don't think it's a first step at this point. That unless, so when we're talking a little bit, Kevin's talking a little bit about kind of self-awareness. Awareness is it has the highest correlation of effective leadership. It's the number one thing. If you can't become aware, how can you make any changes?
Yeah.
So I think that's where we have to begin, is to educate what awareness means. And the work that I do is called performance coaching. I have executive coaches that work with me. I know nothing about business. I know a lot about how people make decisions. So the point I'm making is even the concept of understanding. Is that out there? Are people talking about how do I know that the person I'm speaking to understands? Because they say yes, because they say I don't understand, and how do you know that? And that it's a little complicated, but that's where it has to begin. If it doesn't happen, belonging won't take place, and you're going to start to add more stress to the court.
Yeah.
So that's where it has to begin.
And I love your building understanding. And right, I think to your point earlier that we're making all these decisions within this day, and what we're doing is conserving energy, right? Our brain is conserving energy, that we don't have to put that much thought into every single decision, because if we had to do that for the 35,000, we would be exhausted at the end of the day, correct?
Right.
So one of the things that when we're building understanding, I feel like in the world, as stress levels increase, that the levels of assumptions also increase, because we don't have the time and energy to ask the questions to build awareness and understanding. I've seen more people trigger to that quick thought process with trying to assume what that person's thinking, what their motivation is behind the question, without ever asking a question themselves. And I've just seen that really pick up more throughout the pandemic. And I don't know if it's the remote and hybrid and I can't see you, but I wanted to see what you thought about that. And if there's any correlations there or anything that you've seen or uncovered during your career as well.
Another great point. You've seen this model, Kevin. You can know something, understand it, know something and not understand it. You can understand something and not believe. You can understand something and believe it. You can believe things that are not true. You can believe things that are true. You can either value or not value whether it's the truth or not truth. And then you have to apply this. So when you look at the application, so we always make the inferences. If you want to know what a person believes, watch what they're doing over time, because it's going to subsume all of those things about valuation. Even if you're in coercion, you're respectful of the coercion in order to get things done. So I think that's a critical piece of the whole process of being able to do that. Now, how do we get people to do that when they're working from home? So I work with a variety of people. It's not just the leaders. And so when we get down into the trenches, the belief system that they have is that they're being watched 24/7. Right? And if they're not on the computer. So let's just take that premise. And what if that's wrong? But what if it's right? How do we know? You open up an arc of 2 degrees and travel out 20 miles. That arc is huge.
Yeah.
So what I think is going on is that there are a new set of premises that are taking place from people in their homes versus what was going on, because you could see those things and it kind of added to the truth of what it is that you were believing. Well, so-and-so is at the water cooler 2 or 3 times a day when so-and-so is also there, and I think something is going on. So you can make inferences from things that you're seeing. Now we're making inferences from things that we're not seeing. And that's very dangerous stuff. And so whether it's leadership or whether it's, the in the trenches individuals, that is taking place. I don't think that that's well understood at all. I don't think surveys are going to give you a great explanation of that. I really think that it would take, what I'm talking about is gathering that data and having someone in the firm speaking to someone, showing them that they care, that there's understanding that's going on, because that's not going to be something that comes up just from writing, a checklist. So that's what I would say is one of the major factors that's causing so much disruption and stress at home.
And one thing I want to kind of keep carrying on with that is because I think it has something to do with this as well, is that organizations, leadership, especially top down, they're really good at goal setting, right? And they're the desired outputs of what they want. There is no intention, I believe, right, to really understand performance at a greater level within the organization, because they're not aware of what inputs drive those desired outputs and that cause and effect. And when you say get down in the trenches and they're watched 24/7, that perception is that there's a lack of trust almost within leadership. Are you starting to see trust kind of bear its ugly head in this very emotional state that we are? And is that why PricewaterhouseCoopers and Ernst & Young are changing their whole business model to trust, is because trust builds resilience?
Well, I'd like to believe if that's the case. I don't know very much about them, but so yeah. So when you look at trust, I mean, trust is an interesting system, right? So, and again, Kevin, you've had the experience of looking at the difference between trust and faith. And trust is based upon proof, and it's based upon the past. So if you have not had the experience, then how can you trust it? Now we're in an environment where all this stuff is new. Well, it's not so new now that it's 2 or so years old. But we're still learning about this. We still don't know. I mean, so sometimes I'm asked to do these kind of fireside chats, and we've had some great interactions with people that are willing to talk a little bit more about what their experiences are. I think trust is we can use any word that we want to, and maybe it's a buzzword, but if you're really engendering it, it means that you have to demonstrate proof of and someone has to demonstrate to you the proof that they can be trusted. Whatever the competencies are. If we go back to cognitive empathy, can you trust that you can say this to the person? They now understand what you're thinking. You've made yourself vulnerable. Are they going to use it against me? So very complicated. Well, you're speaking to a psychologist. I can't make this easy, right? So this is...
That's great. That's great. One of your recent posts, Dr. Nick, was about, the age-old question of, are leaders born or are they made? And, what can we do? And you said it's kind of a mix of both of those. Tell me a little bit more about that. Let's dive a little deeper on your thought process.
Sure.
Yeah.
Again, thank you, Chris. I mean, so there was a study done that went on for 50 years, and they observed children from 4 weeks after they were born until they were 50 years old. And at certain stages of development, they started to find specific attributes. One of the things that I look at in what's called a trait versus a state is anxiety. If it's a trait anxiety, it means that there's an inborn predisposition, that the thresholds are lower, which means that you're going to get to an anxious reaction sooner than later.
Okay.
So what if that's the case? And by the way, they could start to determine this about the age of 11 months. So I'm sure who is checking out his son to make sure that he's not going to qualify for that. But yeah, for those of you who don't know. How does that enter into leadership? Well, if a person is anxious and they haven't learned how to handle that anxiety over their time, over their lifetime, what would that do to a leader? Now, what if the individual had that condition and found a more effective way to handle that? Would that affect some potential for leadership? So I'm not saying everybody who's born with anxiety is a better leader. I'm just saying that when we're looking at the combination and permutations of these things, is that you look at things that are along those lines that are inherent predispositions. There are 9 traits. It's called the New York Longitudinal Study, NYLS, Stelichess, Alexander Thomas. For those of you who want to look at the seminal research, great. I quote it all the time. There's newer research that supports it. So when we look at what's predisposed, now, individuals that are anxious tend to be creative because they're creating things that don't exist, and they're used to doing that, which makes them more anxious. But they have an ability to be able to work creative, and so their thresholds are lower. So it's a mixed blessing. Yours truly was one of those guys. I was anxious as a kid, and I have some, talents in the arts as well. So those are some examples, Chris, of things that are inborn. Now, what the research went on to say is that it's 50-50 because, child A, B, or C with parents A, B, or C produce different types of factors in performance. So the one things that we know is threshold of responsiveness, intensity of reactions, adaptability. Some of those things can be determined, and there's an adult questionnaire that can give us that. So when we're doing a robust assessment, we're using things that most people aren't aware of because I don't use personality to assess. I don't understand why people do that, but in any case, so we would use factors like that to take a look at predispositions that might be some of the reasons that can influence certain decision-making processes. So that's some of the inborn stuff, and then some of the experiences. Now, the other piece I always take a look at is grit. And when you look at Duckworth's your research, I boiled it down to 3 things that I look at. Not saying this is the only way to look at it. So it's passion, perseverance. Most people have passion, perseverance for what they're doing. Now, if that person has a high need for positive reinforcement, chances of being gritty is very low. Because for people that are really gritty, they don't need positive reinforcements from other. I don't like positive psychology because that's not the effective way of getting to the essence of what drives a person to perform. So we can change a couple of things, but that's not really going to get to what we're looking at. So how many people that are watching are looking at how much positive reinforcement they need in order to perform at a higher level. I don't use feelings, overrated, and don't tell us the truth. And the reason that I don't believe in confidence is because the definition includes your beliefs about your ability to perform and your feelings. Now, beliefs don't tell us the truth. Take a look at what goes on in the world every day. People are dying, killing other people based upon what they believe. And feelings clearly don't always tell us the truth. Why would we ever use confidence as a predictor of performance?
No, we can't.
Navy SEALs don't do it.
That goes into the inputs, right? And I think organizations right now do not know what leads to maximize performance, right? And I think to your point, the use of discs, the use of Myers-Briggs, like some of these things are now being so drawn outside of what they were originally intended for that they're trying to use those tools to actually help them with performance, right? Or team design or whatever it might be. Can you just talk about, you've mentioned some of the assessments, and I've done one of your assessments, full disclosure to the audience. I have done one of these, and I had a aha moment. The Dr. Nick knew that I took no practice swings in golf. Anybody that has played golf with me knows I do not take any practice swings. And that to me spoke volumes, because how are you ever going to learn how somebody makes decisions and what their potential is from a piece of paper on a resume that already told you what have done, where they've gotten their education from, and what potential experiences that they had in those roles? That's why this makes all the sense in the world to me, what you guys do at Performance in Mind, because before I make a big decision on who's going to lead the company, or who's going to be my CFO or CEO, or who's going to be in my VP of HR, what does she look like, or he or she look like, right? I would like to know how they're going to perform under stress, because we're constantly under states of stress. And I would like to also know, are they a fit for this role before I decide to shell out a lot of this money? Can you talk about, where we are today? Because you've probably seen it. You've seen those con artists, the people that have a great resume and the people that can bullshit their way through an interview.
Yeah.
How are you deciphering fact from fiction when you're seeing the true potential of a leader, whether they're at an entry-level position within the organization or starting to work their way up throughout that corporate ladder?
Well, I sort of give you an example. We do we do talent acquisition. We don't go hunting for people. So if a corp finds, several people, they'll send us, and then we'll do the assessment. So this corporation, professional services corp, and they wanted to hire this person. And I looked over the evaluation. I said, well, the person's not telling you the truth. Oh, we met the guy. So we want to make him a partner. I said, well, he's not telling you the truth. He's pretty aggressive. He said, no. I said, do a better background check. Found out the following. He never worked for a company that he said he worked for.
Wow.
He got fired from the company that he said he resigned from. He had a weapons possession charge. Now, I couldn't tell you that he was that aggressive. I could just tell you that he was aggressive.
Yeah.
And I certainly could tell you that he won't be telling you the truth. Now, in spite of the fact that he passed, and there were 3 or 4 leaders who evaluated this guy and they were ready to have him sign. And fortunately, one of the guys there said, "Oh, we did the test, let Nick tell you what's going on." So that's what we're going to take a look at, because when you look at profiles about decision making, certain processes are pretty glaring. And so that's really what we're doing, is we're trying to look at, a group of phenomenon, which may vary between individuals. And that's one of the reasons why what we do is very, very different. We can't give the report to anyone unless we've actually speak with them. So you're not going to get a report just like that. So you sign up and you get the report.
Yeah.
And because during those interviews, I'm asking questions. Now, sometimes before we do that, they'll send me some stuff, and I'll give questions to the corp, whether it's HR or the CEO who's ever doing the interviewing, and say, here are a couple of things I think you should check on. And pretty amazingly, they're getting data that they weren't getting before.
Yeah, I can imagine, because a piece of paper really only tells you so much. And again, people are they're smarter than they look sometimes, right? They can tell you every answer that they know you want to hear. And if that's their intention of deception, right, they can deceive, right? Because then their attention changes to what they're. And I think that is really in this rapid speed that we're in, and the inability to find talent, or the perception that there is the inability to find talent. I think you're right. I think the organizations that are looking to really be proactive in reducing the amount of stress and the awareness that they have of their employees' lives outside of work, that it's not just a 9 to 5, that they just have to care about their wellness or well-being from that 9 to 5, that it actually goes into their home with their family and their loved ones and their grandparents and their children, right? And I think the more aware that organizations are and leadership becomes of these stressors, to your point, the quicker they can actually create the environments and these cultures that they seek to drive optimal performance. We all know that it's putting the right people in the right seats. So as we're closing out, I had 2 additional questions that I wanted to ask you. One will be our stereotypical close, but before we get there, I wanted to ask you this question. In your estimation, where is the future of leadership headed with all these changes, right? With all these changes that we're seeing, I'm now seeing trauma-informed leadership. We keep throwing buzzwords and keywords on these things. And I have this feeling that you have boiled it down, because you've shared a couple of these words with us on what separates a great leader from an okay leader. And is that going to be the same characteristic now as 10 years from now?
I don't think there's any question that when you look at the great leaders, whether you're looking at biographies, autobiographies, posthumous data, I think you're going to find that there are very specific systems that they're using. And why aren't we using that? And so I appreciate, being up to date, and certainly all the stuff that's come, we don't make such a generalization, but a lot of this stuff really becomes kind of buzzwords. If you look at the Greeks, and that they're noted for their exercise, right? Olympics, all that kind of stuff. And so the Greeks would say, walk amongst the lilies. Like, what? Well, what are you exercising? Your senses. And so when you're walking amongst the lilies, not only are you getting physical exercises, but you're stimulating the entire person because of things that you can see, smell, touch, hear. And so when you talk about what's happening now, why aren't we getting back to the basics? We know there's data out here. Kevin, you know that the assessments that we use is used with the Navy SEALs, and it's used with high performance corps and high performance teams as well. Why are they using that? If it's, I'm not saying it's the only profession that's in danger or the most elite, but when you look at that, this is used to help them train at their highest level. I think decision making is more important than your personality.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that because I think personality is like you said, anybody can put up a front, anybody can act during the time that they're in the office, and I think that was really hard for people during the pandemic. To your point, I think if they were acting right and trying to be something that they're not, and here they are now in a very stressful situation. I think you said it earlier, it has its way of working its way out, right? Whether they say something or what the words that they choose to use, the positive and negative words that they select, that intention always has its way of showing its cards. Intention has a really poopy poker face.
Right. That's true. That's true. You will see it eventually, no doubt.
Yes. And the last but not least, how can I shave a couple strokes off my golf game? If you were to give me one or two tips before we head into the season, I figured I would ask the coach.
Okay. Well, the first thing we want to do is not have a swing thought. So
Okay.
telling you not to have a swing thought is not a good thing. If I said, don't think about pink elephants, I know what you're thinking about.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'll give you, this is a really great tip. So I want you to imagine taking a full swing and just isolate without moving your body. Tell me something that you feel when you're making that swing.
I'm smiling. I feel joy. Yes.
Okay. Well, can you feel, let's look at physically. Can you feel the shoulder turn?
Mm-hmm.
Can you get a sense of what that is? Can you feel that? Can you feel where you are at impact? Can you feel the weight shift in your body without even moving it? All right, so what you're doing there is exercising what's called the motor strip. It's like right here on both sides of your brain. When you have thoughts or when you're paying attention to the past problems, you light up what's called the limbic system, which is responsible for emotions, and the reptilian brain, which keeps your heart going. But all that stuff can happen on its own. We need to preload your brain with the motor strip. So before you take the club back, so try this in your practice swing, try to sense a portion of your swing and make that very specific performance in a practice. Do it again the second time, feel it first in your mind body, do that. Then when you walk into the ball, the last thing you do when you bring your head back, whether it's putting or driving the ball, as soon as you're over the ball, you have to be over the ball for 2 seconds, at least, no more than 4. 50% of your brain is devoted to vision. If you're getting back to the ball quickly, like some people we know, don't take practice swings, you haven't stabilized your brain. And so do that. And then just before you go, you will experience this, what's called proprioception. You'll load the motor strip, pull the trigger. And Kevin, stay in touch. Let me know how you're doing.
Yes. All right. I'll let you know when I get 4 strokes down. Well, I just want to say thank you so much, Dr. Nick. This was a joy. I know how valuable your time is and all the great work that you're doing. And I think you're going to be really, really busy as we kind of move forward in this world of work, as we continue to see that the human capital costs continue to rise. So businesses just have to be a little bit more selective or a little bit more intentional, right, behind their talent development and talent acquisition. But I just want to say thank you so much for blessing us with your intellectual and social capital of all these years of experience that you've had with working with top athletes and performers in the CEO suites as well.
Well, thank you, Chris and Kevin, for this opportunity. I enjoyed it very much. I look forward to seeing the video.
Awesome.